Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and those not so scribed, and welcome to Blether Thegither, your weekly breakdown of news and politics from Scotland and around the world. My name is Stephen Payton, and I'm your host for the day. I'll be here representing The National. Joining me is our regular Angela Haggerty from Common Space, and our special guest today is Adam Ramsay, who writes for Open Democracy as well as a few other places, and kind of keeping yourself busy in a lot of
here and there.
Yeah, lots
Thanks
of
for having
me. Yeah, well, thank you both for coming in and joining me. And as always, we do want to hear what you have to say as well about whatever we are talking about. So we will be watching the comments down below. So please do write down what you're thinking, give us a wee like and a share if you want to help us reach more people. So to start with, I guess like your big project at the moment, Adam, has been this delving into some of the dark money surrounding the DUP, where their funding came from when it came to the Brexit campaign.
Yeah.
I mean, like, can you give us a bit of a rundown of exactly what that is?
Sure.
From,
So
I guess the beginning. You know,
from the beginning. Well, for me, the beginning is like the week before the European referendum, and I'm coming up Waverley Steps in Edinburgh. I've just been down in Doncaster interviewing people about it, and there's these two guys there campaigning for a Leave vote, and I start talking to them, and then I kind of start arguing with them, and then halfway through the argument, I realise that what's called the imprint at like the bottom of their poster they're holding says J Donaldson, Democratic Unionist Party, then Delaware Avenue, Belfast. So I'm like, do you know who the DUP are? And I start shouting about that. And then I storm off home. And on my walk home, I'm like, wait a second. Why are the DUP paying for campaign materials in Edinburgh? And then I think, well, there's only one reason I can think of for that, which is that I just happen to know, because of some friends in Northern Ireland who've campaigned on it, the campaign donations in Northern Ireland are secret. So in the rest of the UK, if you give a bunch of money to a political party, they have to declare who you are. If you give it to a Northern Irish party, they don't. So my first thought was, well, what that means is someone is trying to give money to the Brexit campaign but hide who they are. Someone is secretly giving money to Brexit. And then I did nothing about that at all for about 6 months because I was busy with other stuff. But then there was an election in Northern Ireland, and I thought I should probably do something about this. So I rang up Peter Gagan, who's another journalist based in Scotland, who'd also noticed the same thing and said so on Facebook around the same time.
From the Ferret, Peter?
From the Ferret, yeah.
New media?
Absolutely. And was like, how about we look into where this money came from? And Peter was up for it. And so we started delving into it. And first we were like, well, how much was it? And we worked out that it was at least £250,000. They'd paid for stuff all over the UK. We found people in Cardiff and in London and in Manchester and so on who'd seen their materials and figured out how much it was, at least. And then we kind of handed them in the Northern Irish elections until they admitted that actually it was £435,000. And it had come from this group called the Constitutional Research Council, whose chair, they said, is a man called Richard Cook. Now, that's kind of like pulling back a curtain to reveal another curtain, because like the Constitutional Research Council isn't really a thing, so it doesn't have lots of money it's made itself. It's not like saying we got from this big company, it's just another group. But we did know who Richard Cook was. Richard Cook is the former vice chair of the Scottish Tories. He lives in Glasgow. And so I went through his company's house account and found rather surprisingly that in 2013 he set up this company called 5 Star Investment Management Limited, and I found its founding documents. And the thing that was surprising is there were 2 other people who founded it with him. One was Prince Nawaf bin Abdulaziz Al Saud, who's the former head of the Saudi Arabian Intelligence Service, an incredibly senior Saudi prince, and the guy whose son is the current Saudi ambassador to the UK. And then the other was this guy, Peter Haystrup, who, after a bit more digging, we found was this Danish guy who basically said to us on the phone that he's a spy and who was involved in running about 550 Kalashnikovs to a group of Hindu terrorists in West Bengal in 1995 and is kind of wanted by the Indian prosecution service for that. So that's some surprising characters. And then we kept on digging. We found various other kind of unsavoury things. So one of the other times, there's only 3 times that the Constitutional Research Council appear in any documents. One of them is that they gave £6,500 to Steve Baker, the MP for Wickham, who's now the junior Brexit minister under David Davis. But at the time, he was chair of this group called the European Research Group, which is the kind of group of right-wing Tory pro-Brexit MPs. And I went back through Steve Baker's register of interest and everything. It turns out that in 2013, he took a whole bunch of money, about £19,000, from this arms company, while at the same time he was vice chair of the all-party parliamentary group on the aerospace industry. In other words, he was promoting the arms industry in Parliament while taking a whole lot of money from the arms industry. He's also got weird connections all over the world. He keeps on going off to conferences paid for by like right-wing American organisations, funded by the Koch brothers and by the Mercer family and all that kind of stuff. And they also gave some money, although we don't know how much, to pay for a poll in the Tory leadership election around this time last year, which was very helpful to Andrea Leadsom at the time. So again, we don't know where the money came from, but the poll, which they would have had, if you pay for a poll, you can choose when to release it. It was the day MPs had their first ballot on the Tory leader, and it showed Andrea Leadsom as the key challenger to Theresa May, and was kind of spun in the Telegraph as a pro-Leadsom result.
Okay, so I guess
you'll get that, yeah.
Yeah, I know. But so I guess to summarise that down, the 3 times that this organisation has donated to anything was to the Brexit campaign,
to £435,000 to the DUP to pay for Brexit stuff.
Pay for Brexit, to fund a specific MP who is now in a position of being part of the negotiating team for Brexit.
So it's to fund it was to his office, but what it paid for was a conference or a meeting of the European Research Group, what we think was probably a Christmas party. It was like 19th of December, they get £6,500, you know, what's that for?
Some party.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and the third donation being to Andrea Leadsom, who also, if she'd been leading the Tory party, would have probably taken a more...
We've got to be careful here. It wasn't to Andrea Leadsom, it was paid for a poll with Salvation.
Sorry, a poll that could have been spun in a manner...
But it was spun in Telegraph as being very good for Leadsom.
Okay, and of course if Leadsom had become the leader of the Conservative Party, the position in Brexit would have been quite different.
She was like the candidate of the pro-Brexit movement.
Exactly,
yeah.
So all these donations all seem to come back to having a very specific purpose, which was either seemingly, let's say, seemingly pushing people into positions where a certain kind of Brexit could be achieved.
Yeah, and we don't know where the money came from. We still don't know where this organisation actually gets its cash from.
Okay, well that sounds like a proper conspiracy.
Do you feel confident that you're going to be able to dig that information up?
One day, and we're certainly funding a lot of interesting things along the way. We've had a crowdfunder which people have been very kindly contributing to, which has meant I've been able to spend some more time recently looking into it. We've got lots of routes we're trying out at the moment. I don't want to say too much in public about what they are, so they don't close those doors quickly. But absolutely, we're still going.
And these are presumably fairly powerful people with some money that we're talking about.
They definitely have some money.
Yeah.
Well, they did. We
so
know that.
Do you ever get the impression that there's some discomfort with your investigation, or?
We definitely. I mean, we hear that the DUP are pretty uncomfortable about it all, and kind of worried about it all, and that's good. And they've definitely been. I've had an angry exchange in the last week with the guy who was chair, Tim Lowshin, who's the MP who's chair of Andrea Leadsom's campaign, who's been very cross about our latest article and claiming that I never, contacted his office about it when I said that I did. I actually, as I pointed out to him, I did record the whole conversation, so I do, have evidence I did speak to his office and so on. But they're clearly a bit cross about the whole thing.
And I guess, this money, I mean, do you personally think that it was being used, this almost organisation was set up to achieve a certain kind of Brexit? I mean, would you say that was probably the goal of where these funds were ultimately being diverted to?
Well, remember, the first thing it did was pay just for the Brexit campaign. So it wasn't a particular kind of Brexit, it was just to fund, to pour money into the Brexit campaign through a secret route. And I mean, the thing to remember is that an organisation like the Constitutional Research Council, it's just a few people giving themselves a name. I mean, we could just set up, and we could just decide that we are an organisation that gives ourselves an obscure name and give money to a political party, and it would be the equivalent.
And obviously the money being funneled through Northern Ireland, where the donations don't need to be declared. I mean, why do you think there would be that desire for secrecy? Well,
and it's interesting because one of the first things we did was kind of set up a petition to get the government to change that law. And what the government has now done is announced that from July 2017, they'll pass a law saying that all donations to Northern Irish parties will be transparent. What's interesting about that is that there was a previous law in 2014 called the Northern Ireland Miscellaneous Act, for the geeks, which said that one day all donations from 2014 onwards would be released. So James Brokenshire, who's the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, just needs to say, now all donations to Northern Irish parties from 2014 onwards are going to be public, and they can publish them now because the Electoral Commission has collected all the information from then on. And what he's doing instead of that is passing a whole new law, which he says is about bringing in transparency. What it's really doing is just making sure that all donations from 2014 to 2017 are secret. Now, of course, there are other donations to Northern Irish parties and to other parties in that time that will be released because of that. But the one massive donation that keeps hidden is the one that we're looking into. So when we're feeling a bit, smug about our work, we like to say that the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland is pushing through a particular law just to stop us finding out the answer to this question.
But I mean, we come back to like the sort of like question I was asking, which was like, why would somebody want it to be
Right,
secret?
sorry, yeah. Why would it be secret? I mean, the excuse they always give is that during the Troubles, people who gave money to parties in Northern Ireland could be put at risk or whatever. But the reason I think that's kind of nonsense is that if you stood as a candidate for any political party in Northern Ireland, you have to have your address on the ballot paper. If you're the party, if you're like a candidate's agent, even for local government, which lots of political activists are, your address and name is public. So what it's saying is basically if you're involved in electoral politics in Northern Ireland, then you have to be publicly transparent about who you are in the normal ways, in every other way. But if you're a rich person giving lots of money, you don't. So basically, what I think that's really about is longer term corruption in Northern Ireland, and the fact that it allows for the kind of petty corruption, kind of corruption around planning deals, like how these parties are all involved in a whole, and to be honest, particularly the DUP have got a long history of financial scandals where basically a lot of their politicians, certainly not all of them, but a lot of them have made a lot of money in shady ways, and that is why a series of their leaders have often ended up falling is in financial scandal. There's a long history of this.
And what next then? Like, where do you think this is going to go next? Like, is it just going to? I mean, do you think they're going to be successful in just brushing it away quietly? Or?
Well, they're not going to let us. We're not going to let them.
Adam's on the case.
Yeah, we're not going to let them brush us away. And as I say, the fact that people have given money to mean that we can keep doing this has been very helpful. Because obviously, I need to keep feeding myself, and so and so that makes a big difference. And certainly, we're not going to drop it. And people do, things do break eventually, and we will keep pushing it. And so we don't know what the next. You never know what the next story is going to be until you find it. But we're still digging and absolutely still going. And I've still got my massive spreadsheet of people I'm working through and ringing and so on. And so keep working on that certainly.
Yeah, right. And this was a story that kind of started with Open Democracy. It was yourself and Peter that were looking into this.
Yeah.
But since then it started to grow. Like it's been picked up by I think Channel 4, the BBC.
Yep.
They've started to really talk about it. I mean, this is a story that is going to keep building momentum, right? I mean, is that what you think is going to keep happening here?
Yeah, I think that the more that we can find out and the more we can reveal about it, the more people start to notice. Of course, it was very helpful for us that the DUP ended up in the position they did in Parliament because of the arithmetic. People did suddenly start to take notice at the point at which they're, propping the government up, and rightly so. Because before, this was an important question because it was about Brexit and also about the governing party in Northern Ireland. But now it's about a party which is holding the British government up and what its links are and where it's getting its money from. And this is, a huge question.
Okay, great. I mean, so what do you think is probably the most important thing then that's been uncovered so far? The most meaningful connection or link that you've discovered?
I think, that's a difficult question, and in a way you could say any of them. I think the interesting question is really Steve Baker, who's now Brexit minister, who's at the centre of this world where whatever you think about it's dark money and corruption and so on, he's very tied into really quite radical right-wing groups in the States. He goes to the same kinds of events as, for example, there's this event that happens in Central America, all these kind of radical right people across the world. It's happened 3 times. We don't know what year he went. But they do say on the website all people who've gone. One of the people who went is Putin's economic advisor, the guy who pushed through flat tax in Russia. And Steve Baker's another one of the people who went. And this is like a small event every 3, it's happened 3 times. So he's got, very, very questionable connections and is pushing this, really radical right, not like fascist radical right, but like, kind of neoliberal radical right politics into the centre of British politics. And that's a huge change in the nature of the Tory party. Everyone talks about how Labour's moved to the left under Corbyn. We really haven't talked about how the Tories have moved a long way to the right under May.
Yeah, exactly. And it is that sort of Overton window scenario where, for a long time, the further the right to the Tories got, the more out there some of Corbyn's policies seemed, even though they weren't necessarily particularly radical. But actually, speaking of Corbyn, which kind of brings us on, I guess, quite nicely into the next story, is this week we've actually seen a bit of a shift in Corbyn's rhetoric around immigration. Or rather, I'd argue his message hasn't necessarily changed. The core part of it is still there. I mean, Corbyn's stance for a while now has basically been that immigrants are not to blame for coming to the UK looking for work. Ultimately, it's the bosses who exploit that situation to bring down prices, to bring down working conditions. That's been his position. But really what we've seen this week has been a little bit of shift in the way that he's phrasing that. It's starting to seem to be a little bit more the kind of language you would expect from, not necessarily UKIP, but certainly more anti-immigrant sounding rhetoric, even if his core message is staying the same. I mean, I don't know, Angela.
What did he say?
He started to sort of talking about how he described how the wholesale importation of immigration had destroyed working conditions in the UK. And then after that, kind of clarified that he was talking about it was bosses who were ultimately looking elsewhere to employ people to bring them in so they could fire their workforce and pay less as a result of that. That was ultimately the clarification, but the wording itself has kind of been the thing that's been picked up and is running in a lot of the press.
Is this like all of this kind of, oh my God, look at what Corbyn said about immigration? Is it all based on that one quote, or has he said anything else?
I think a lot of it's coming down from just not just that one quote, but more that the wording changed.
Yeah.
And yeah, because this was on Sunday morning, that Corbyn kind of like phrased it in this different way than he had before. And I've been wondering if this is actually either kind of like a Corbyn gaffe, like one of those things where Corbyn sometimes says something and then it gets misconstrued because people are looking to misconstrue it, and that's where this is like all this discussion is coming from, or whether or not it is off the back of like listening to advisors saying that your language needs to move a little bit away from there and start to sound a little bit more vague to bring in some of those people who are looking for less immigration within the UK, and whether or not it's a political move rather than a mistake.
It seems like a hell of a reaction to me to something quite minor, which could just be clumsy wording, or it could be that kind of, just trying to capture the attention of a certain group of voters who may think immigration is the problem, but misunderstand why it might be a problem. And so I think what he's saying is right in the sense that it's the working conditions, that it's the people at the top that are exploiting working class people here as well as immigrant workers, but then trying to deliver that message in a way that might actually kind of pull some of the people that have not quite understood exactly what the problem around immigration is. If that's a tactic, then I can understand the tactic. I can see what they're trying to do there. But it's a very subtle change of wording to really be trying to do something like that. And the idea that Corbyn's like, decades worth of being consistent on his views about certain things and certain values that are really important. The idea that all of that changes because of a quote, that much of the same media that pummels Corbyn for everything have really went with, just seemed to me a bit of an overreaction.
I mean, Corbyn would always be attacked more than the Tories for what he says. That's obviously true, and he shouldn't be. I think it is also worth remembering that there is a generational difference on the left around issues like immigration. You see this in the States as well. So, to give a kind of corollary, think about the start of the Bernie Sanders campaign about 2 years ago. One of the things that people on the left in Scotland and across the UK often said was that, you look at his rhetoric around immigration, he's not always been great. And that was true. And one of the things that Bernie Sanders did throughout his campaign is listen to a sort of younger left and bring in what's called the Dreamer movement in the States and start to say, actually, I will defend migrants' rights. And he kind of shifted his position on that and did so, I think very well. And I think we've seen the same a bit with Corbyn, that it's not, he hasn't, if you look at his long-term history on immigration, I don't know any historic statements he's made about immigration either way. And, if you look at people around him on the left, there has been a sort of fear of immigration, as, people on the left sometimes say, on a particular bit of the left, see it as the kind of boss's tool to bring down wages, which I think is very dangerous and is total nonsense. And that it's important that Corbyn does the same thing that Sanders did, which is understand that being in solidarity with migrant workers is not about saying that migration brings down wages. It doesn't. There's very, very little evidence for that. And what he should be doing is, absolutely organising migrant workers and supporting movements that do that. And he shouldn't be participating in the propaganda which says that the reason wages fall is migration, which is just A, that it's not true, and B, is incredibly dangerous. And I think the reason it's been blown up and people have talked about it a lot is it comes in the context in which Corbyn has, signed up to a particular form of Brexit, which a lot of people have been quite surprised to see him support. A lot of people who voted Remain and, are hoping that we won't be pulled out, all the way out of the EU after the referendum, and have seen Corbyn sign up to what is basically a hardest possible Brexit, and that's why people are concerned about it, I think.
And that has been like the other sort of change. I think one of the things that's maybe fueled some of the speculation around whether or not his rhetoric or how he's been discussing immigration shifted as well. Since this week, he also said that we would have to leave the single market. Like if we left the EU, we'd have to leave the single market, which actually isn't even correct. And it's sort of like this weird situation where the Lib Dems are saying that they are now the only party who are campaigning for remaining with the EU in a way which is completely overlooking the Greens and the SNP and other positions.
It was always a, campaigned for Remain, but not very enthusiastically as leader of the Labour Party, and it's always been kind of knowledge that Corbyn's not that great a fan of the EU and its institutions and the way that it works. So I don't know that. I mean, I don't feel as surprised about some of the direction that that's gone in as other people seem to.
Yeah.
I think the issue is that it's that much of what Corbyn is attracted in terms of the younger vote, they do tend to be much much more open. What you're talking about, Adam, to migrant workers, to other nationalities. They don't think maybe in the same way that people 40 or 50 years ago would think about these things, and they tend to be more pro-Remain. But there is also, I think, a sense that the Remain camp, even though they voted Remain, there doesn't seem to be a burning passion to stop Brexit coming from that. There's no huge campaign to halt it. It's more a thing about values, I think, especially among the younger people. And if you could paint a Brexit to them that was more appealing than what the Tories are painting, a visionary thing, kind of like IndyRef, then I think potentially you probably could get them on board. If they think, well, Brexit's going to happen anyway, I have to back someone, the Labour Party could soak that up, but still be pursuing, maybe the kind of Brexit that Corbyn may have secretly wanted. Who knows?
Yeah, and the strategy around Brexit isn't necessarily a stupid one short term. People do not care about the EU as much as journalists care about the EU, and Corbyn has been able and did well in this election by straddling that divide on the EU, and by winning voters from both sides. And as you say, what people care about is values. It's not about kind of specific constitutional outcomes. In Scotland, we did get to a place where people cared about specific constitutional outcomes. I've never felt that was the case in England with Brexit, particularly. There's maybe 20% on each side, which is a lot of people who do, but most people don't.
It's a much smaller campaign period as well, and the main thrust of it. So.
Absolutely. But I think the interesting question is how Brexit will unfold and how people will change their minds about these things or not as it happens. And there's a whole range of such complicated issues that I don't think anyone can be absolutely certain about predicting how each of them will land. But Labour tying itself now to a Brexit process which could well end up being disastrous is a massive risk. They maybe think they can blame the Tories for that and how it plays out. But if they're, labelled right now as being absolutely supporting a really quite hard Brexit, and if that does turn out to be disastrous, it could well be that's, a huge problem for them to come. But maybe not, we'll see.
I think they still look really confused on it.
That's
Nobody's really quite sure whether it is a hard Brexit that the party itself is backing. There's a lot of disagreement clearly within the ranks. So
it isn't necessarily a problem for them. And being seen as being, I think voters are confused on it. And if they get across their core message, which is we'll stand up for you, and on wages and housing and so on, and public services, and they say, look, we can do that with Brexit or without Brexit, then that's how Labour will likely win. It's by moving away from constitutional politics.
But I mean, this is exactly it. If we're talking about them having this position, like they need to be clear of what the position is. Like if that's what they want to campaign on, like there has been confusion around what Corbyn meant around his position on immigration. And when he did come out and say that we need to leave the single market, you still had the Welsh leader, Carwyn Jones, coming out and saying, well, actually, no, we don't. And we want to stay in the single market. And then the Scottish Labour leader, Kezia Dugdale, coming out and essentially back in the same position. Like, it's that sort of Labour thing of like, what's the message? There's too many voices saying different things here, and it's one of the things that's been criticised for a long time of seeming disunited, not having a single clear message.
But I still have often thought that this talk about the single market probably doesn't translate as much to people on the ground living their daily lives as, again, we think it does, because we obsess over the specific details of political positions. At the single market, I mean, at one point, Nicola Sturgeon, it felt like she didn't say anything other than single market, and I thought, I don't know how well that actually goes down with people, though. I can't remember ever hearing anyone use the term single market before the EU referendum. People didn't know what it was. A lot of people still don't know what it is. So I don't think people obsess over that as much as we do as journalists and as politicians would. It's the message. It's the brand almost. What kind of Brexit are you selling me here? That's what people actually care about. And if Labour can get a more powerful, visionary message, a hopeful message of Brexit, like you say, it's all about public services, the things that people care about, the NHS. Less about the constitution, less about the political detail, less about the economic detail. That might be the thing, and among all the chaos and the confusion, if you have to opt for something, you're going to opt for that.
Exactly, and I see your point. I mean, this is something we've talked about before, of like sometimes the stuff that we obsess about is just not things that other people care about. I think Labour's problem is just an inconsistency of even what that message is, which actually was interesting because this week as well there was a report that came out from Scottish Labour, or specifically the left in Scottish Labour, the Campaign for Socialism, which is led by MSP Neil Findlay. And they were looking back at the recent election and Labour's messaging in that. And what they actually found was that the messaging that Scottish Labour had was a disaster. Like it actually increased the vote for the Conservative Party because their entire messaging in Scotland was send Nicola a message. So when the rest of the UK was talking about, for the many, not the few, really inspiring, hopeful message, in Scotland we were actually stuck with this, send Nicola a message, vote Labour to stop another independence referendum. And when it came to that discussion, and something that we've talked about again before, was that they were running in the same message as the Conservatives, and the Conservative message was stronger. So as it turns out, this report from Scottish Labour has found out that they were actually ultimately promoting the Conservative Party accidentally by saying, send Nicola a strong message, and then people going, okay, I guess I'll vote Conservative because that's the best way to do that. Actually, if they'd done it a different way, things could have been very different. The report actually says it was about 5,500 votes in each constituency is what they lost to the Conservatives because of their own messaging. Which
I felt a bit like that at the time because it felt like Kezia Dugdale was just repeating what Ruth Davidson was saying, and I was thinking that looks like the Tory message, and you're just hammering that into people's heads, but you're not differentiating yourself as in you offer something else. I thought it was so close, it almost looked coordinated at times. I mean, the messaging was almost identical on some things. And I just thought, I don't know why Kezia Dugdale thinks that's such a good idea. That could backfire.
I mean, there's an old saying in American elections that every election is a referendum and the winner is the person who sets the question. And from the start of this election, my main perception of Scottish Labour, exactly as you say, is that everything they said was confirming that the question in this election was what the Scottish Tories said it was. And it was a question where, the answer to that was either you vote SNP or you vote Tory. There's no, if the question is, do you want a second referendum or not on independence, either you do see a vote SNP or you don't see a vote Tory. Scottish Labour are never going to be the strongest on that, whereas as you say, if they'd run a clear message of their own, then, the Labour manifesto was hugely popular and a lot more people would vote for it. I find myself in a position where if I'd lived in England, I'd been very tempted to vote Labour, but I could not vote for a Scottish Labour Party that was very actively saying that the one thing that vote meant was I opposed a second referendum and I want a second referendum. Even if they just shut up about that, I might have considered voting for them, even if they just not talk about it so much. But when they're saying this election is a referendum and a second referendum, I cannot vote for them.
So that's a question then. So I mean, obviously this deal with the DUP. Theresa May just on constantly shaky ground right now. If we're coming back for another general election in a year and a half, let's say, which seems to be what a lot of people are saying it could well be, I mean, do you think that we could see Labour learning a lesson from this and coming into it the next time with that popular message that Corbyn was promoting, and we could actually see that shift in Scotland where the Conservatives lose that little bit of support they built up for themselves and it goes back to being more of a straight run between Labour and the SNP?
I mean, to kind of dodge the question, initially, I don't think there will be an election for much longer than that. I don't see why the Tories would ever consider calling an election now for the longest possible time. It's up to Theresa May or whoever the Tory Prime Minister is to decide to have an election, unless there's a series of by-elections soon which they lose and lose their majority. I just don't see why they would go with that. I think there's a good chance of Labour winning. So, why on earth, for example, would their funders let them do that when their funders are terrified of Corbyn? But if there is an election, which there could well be, I've been wrong about these things before.
Could all fall apart.
Then yeah, I think it's perfectly possible that we'll see Labour and Scottish Labour learn some lessons from the mistakes they made this time, and run with a much better message, and do a lot better. The caution I give is that it's worth remembering that the people in Scottish Labour who make all these mistakes do so because of their ideology, and they're not just going to change their mind about all this stuff. They passionately believe all the wrong things that they think, and they will continue to passionately believe them. They're not just sellouts. They're people who are, conviction politicians for a whole series of wrong ideas from the 1990s. And until they retire, they're still going to be around thinking all these wrong things that they learned in the 90s.
You said the campaign for socialism was kind of led by Neil Findlay, who's very pro-Corbyn. He's sort of Corbyn's man in Scotland. But Neil Findlay is vehemently anti-independence, and he can be vocally so on social media and really quite nasty about it too. So while you might look at someone like Neil Findlay and think, well, that's a positive step forward for Labour in Scotland if some of his ideas in support for Corbyn are taken on board and they move away from independence referendum chat, like you're saying, Adam. If nothing else, it might just make them a possible vote for pro-Indy people rather than completely ruling it out. But even someone like Neil Findlay feels so strongly that way that it's... I don't know whether you need some sort of a more focused effort of potentially pro-Indy people starting to mix that up within the Labour Party so that they can finally soften that stance on the independence question and leave the constitutional options open. Stop trying to find a position and realise that there are actually other things that the people in the country care about right now. Maybe that's what you move into. And they have moved away a little bit from the India F2 talk, I've noticed, at least since the election. They put out some PR stuff. They were going to launch this summer campaign. They've launched an new industrial strategy for Scotland, which was actually quite interesting. And I noticed that in their PR stuff, they did call, they did use that "for the many, not the few" slogan. And they did mention, opposition to a second independence referendum, but their main thing was opposing the SNP's austerity. So they're trying to bundle the SNP and the Tories as the parties of austerity now, and Labour as the sole party that can fight austerity, which is a message that could cross the borders north and south if they did that well. So I think that they are accepting that the messaging needs to change. How close that goes to Corbyn, I think it could be a mistake to go too close to Corbyn, because there was a big battle not that long ago about Labour's autonomy in Scotland after Joanne Lamont left. And a lot of talk that Labour was like a branch office, that it couldn't make its own decisions, couldn't come up with its own strategy. So it might be a bad idea for it to just go completely on the Corbyn train. But it could definitely adopt some of that and then try and carve some sort of identity out for itself that maybe just leave the constitutional stuff alone if it's not clear exactly where Labour's place in that could be. Because the Tories have got the union wrapped up. They're not going to compete with the Tories on that for the foreseeable.
I mean, there was always that almost like amusing thing about Scottish Labour, which was that the point where they finally managed to firmly establish we have nothing to do with the UK Labour Party is the moment the UK Labour Party got an incredibly popular leader. And it's like, oh, just oh no.
You really can't catch a break.
But speaking of such devolved sediments, this is sort of slightly older news now because this happened just right after our last show, so we're kind of getting around to it now. But of course, this sort of week we did also see a Tory minister ultimately saying that the position of First Minister in Scotland was essentially on par with the Secretary of State for Scotland, the Scotland office. And that Nicola Sturgeon should be reporting to David Mundell at the moment rather than speaking directly to Theresa May when it came to discussing Brexit or presumably other situations as well. It seems like there's been a bit of a closing of the door to the First Minister. And it does seem a little bit like it's probably about trying to assert strength here, but I think it just makes Theresa May look a little bit weaker, to be honest. It looks like she's kind of not able to deal with the fact that we have these devolved nations, that there is, I'd argue, a will for more devolved powers and settlements in that manner. It doesn't seem like a strong move. I mean, I don't know if either of you agree.
Depends who to. I mean, what does it look like to unionists, though? I don't know. Do other people look at that and think and feel some sort of reassurance that think that there is an order in place, that Nicola Sturgeon's been put in her place, and that the union is safer as a result? There could be some people interpret it totally differently. I really don't know. I'm curious, actually, sometimes if we step outside the indie bubble, what does this look like to everyone else?
I mean, I think that, that sort of thing is a process story. Most people don't care about that much. But what it tells a story about, really, is a broader strategy that Westminster Tories have towards Scotland and devolution in general, which I think you've got to go back to 1987 in order to understand. And remember that in the second devolution referendum, the referendum that set up Holyrood, the Tories were against devolution in the first place. And one of the reasons for that was there was a big difference of opinion between Labour and the Tories. Labour thought that the way to, as the famous quote put it, kill nationalism stone dead, was devolution. You set up a Scottish Parliament, and that would be, that is what I see as classic Labour triangulation. You take the middle position, and that keeps everyone happy. And triangulation just never works. And what the Tories understood at the
Labour,
time,
though. Appreciate it.
yeah, well, indeed. and what the Tories said at the time is, if you give them some devolution, you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. The more people see devolution, the more they'll like it, the more they'll demand more, and that actually will stimulate the independence movement. And actually, the Tories were right about that. As we've seen, once we got a Scottish Parliament, everyone was like, "Oh, yeah, more of that, please," and then demanded more powers and more powers and more powers, and then independence. And what the Tories are saying now is we need to stop and reverse that process. And so, when we're seeing, you're not going to meet with Sturgeon, which is just kind of symbolic in a way, but is an interesting bit of it. More importantly, the various powers that are coming back to the UK from the EU, which under the devolution settlement should go to Holyrood. So agriculture is devolved and largely managed from the EU in practice at the moment. So when CAP when agriculture policy comes back to Westminster, really for Scotland it should be devolved back to Holyrood, and that's looking like that's not going to happen. And that's the stuff I'm much more concerned about, because the last thing you want is Michael Gove in charge of the countryside. Yeah. And that is in fact a huge reversal of devolution in practice. And so that for me I think really is part of that Tory strategy of undermining the devolution process, because they think that devolution is what has led to more demands for independence.
See, actually, I slightly disagree with you in this point, because, I absolutely understand that maybe that was the Tories' logic, but I think if you look back even just to a few years before the independence referendum, there was that discussion around more powers, potentially holding a referendum, but ultimately it was the very intentional decision to not have an option for Devo Max on the ballot paper that I think has led to support for independence. Because if it had been on there, actually what we would have seen was probably actually something closer to killing nationalism. Because everyone would have went, well, yeah, you know what, let's have the Devo Max
that's
settlement,
the middle ground
and then
again,
that'll be
isn't
it. But I think that's what people would have backed, because everything shows that that's where the support was at the beginning of that campaign.
That's where the support was at that point. But the thing you have to ask, so the difference between Devo Max and independence is foreign policy. So the question you have to ask is, if we'd had that, so let's say there was the two-option referendum, independence, Devo Max. Sure, people would have, I think, in 2014 voted for Devo Max. What happens 5-10 years down the line when Westminster takes us into another stupid war in the Middle East? Do you say, well, actually, maybe we want our foreign policy back too? And so the process of devolution, basically it's the classic thing. You give people more power, they want more power. You give them more power, you want more power still. And the Tories have been right about that. So I agree that in 2014, sure, the point at which people were at, it turned out, was they wanted Devo Max at that point. They weren't yet ready for independence. They didn't vote for it. That doesn't mean that if they'd got more devolution as promised, and remember, ultimately, the kind of result of the referendum was the second option. Holyrood was given some more powers, not as much as we all might like, but it was given some more powers. And the question then is whether people look at Holyrood and think it's using these powers better than Westminster is using its powers. Westminster is taking us in. It's done something stupid with foreign policies. Say, for example, dragging us out of the EU. So we want ultimately that power back. And foreign policy is always the ultimate line of independence. And at some point, with the more power Holyrood has, at some point Westminster is going to mess up foreign policy, and people will think, actually, we don't want that back too.
I agree with you, and I think that this is what's taken us towards the final showdown on the Indy question, because we've talked about this, I think, before on the show, and I've had the feeling, as you're saying, with the powers coming back from the EU and the uncertainty about where that's going, and just the tone, the messaging, the way that things are moving, that there's going to be an attempt by the Tories to sort of crack down a bit on devolution where they can roll it back. And I don't even feel like the Scottish Parliament is safe itself anymore. I think it feels like it could be unprecedented circumstances, but I don't think that it's all that impossible for there to be an eventual leading towards a campaign where you sort of convince Scots that you'd probably be better off without that thing anyway. So long term, I think that's where the Tories might want to go, is take back as much power as is possible. So the question for the Indy movement is whether they can communicate strongly enough what's actually at stake here and really get that across. Because I think it now has to go either one way or the other, and I don't think there is going to be the middle ground. What people voted for in 2014 was a sort of a middle ground, but it wasn't underpinned by an actual vote for a Devo Max, so it was always a little bit hazier than that. But they were promised more powers. They were promised that a no vote would mean you weren't going to be ignored, you were going to be valued, and you were going to be given these more powers. That's what people voted for. But it's I don't think that is long term sustainable. It has to go either one way, or it has to go the other way. I don't think that you stay in this limbo forever, because there are two forces that are constantly trying to pull it the other way, and we're either going to get Indy within not that long a time scale, I don't think, or we're going to see a gradual rolling back of powers. I don't think that middle ground really exists.
I think you're right in saying that it's about how competently the Yes movement can actually explain that, though. Because looking at the fallout, specifically around this thing to do with like Nicola Sturgeon being told that you're basically on par with someone in the Scotland office, that's how we're viewing this devolved administration now. It was framed very much as a slight against Nicola Sturgeon, and people picked that up as it's a slight against Nicola Sturgeon. It's not a slight against Nicola Sturgeon. It's a slight against the position of First Minister of Scotland. Like, that's ultimately it. It's a slight against the concept of devolution in Scotland, not a specific person. And unless the Yes movement gets good at framing it in the lines of like, this isn't about a party, this is about how close you want decision making to be to you.
But you know, I don't think the Yes movement's doing very well on that front at the moment, because the Yes movement has sort of descended into a kind of, well, I mean, I say the Yes movement, this is just stuff you see online. I don't know that this translates everywhere. But there is a certain tribal mindset that's taken over in the last couple of years, perhaps a little bit out of boredom. But people do sometimes look at these things with Sturgeon and take it as a very personal thing. It's about Nicola Sturgeon, it's about the SNP, it's about us, it's about the little bubble. Kind of lose sight of the bigger picture a little bit. So yeah, I agree. I think that the Indy movement has to get better with communication and of painting that picture, which I think it did really well in the time preceding 2014. You know, people were starting to see Scotland in a context they'd never looked at it before. It was an amazing achievement to get people to do that. And of course, the Scottish Independence Convention's meeting with Nicola Sturgeon, early August, that's expected. So that potentially could be, you know, that could be a really positive step forward, I think.
But yeah, I think if we're talking about like Scotland trying to take a position in the world, even the way that Nicola Sturgeon, or rather the position of First Minister of Scotland, has been seen to be more of an international position, like being accepted in other countries, be taken in all these places, which is quite remarkable in some ways. That comes off the back of the independence referendum, of that question of what country do you want to be, or of having a national discussion in that scale.
I find it fascinating that after Trump was elected, there was a whole debate about what Sturgeon did and should and shouldn't say to Donald Trump. And no one talks about the fact that the President of the United States is calling someone whose constitutional position, in terms of what actual powers Scotland has, isn't, you know, more significant than the, you know, a regional, like, Prime Minister in regional Chancellor in Germany or in France. You know, it's not like the whoever it is that's in charge of Bavaria got a phone call from Trump. You know, because as you say, there's this kind of difference between the constitutional powers written in law of the First Minister of Scotland and what's come to be the actual practical constitutional powers of the actual First Minister of Scotland, which is much, much higher than that. And, you know, the fact that Sturgeon, you know, after the European referendum was off talking to senior EU leaders, but, you know, the fact that the position is treated like Prime Minister of a country rather than like, governor of American state or whatever. It's been a huge shift and very hard to row back.
And that's probably where half this need to kind of curtail, or through either taking powers at the back of the EU or this sort of deliberate slapdown. The intention of that is to bring the perception of the First Minister probably back closer to the reality of the legislation for what that position is. I think you're completely correct. But that does start to bring us towards the end of the show, unfortunately. And I feel like we could have talked about this for a good while longer. So I'll have you back on another time, Adam. But yeah, so thank you everyone who tuned in, and thank you for everyone leaving comments down below. As always, it's nice to keep an wee eye on what's being said.
What's the most offensive comment?
Nice
well, there was some trolling, obviously, because when is there not? So yeah, thanks very much for taking part in the show alongside of us. Thank you very much for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
And
thanks
as always, thank you to yourself as well. We will be back again next week at 3 p.m. as always, and you can tune into this on the form of a podcast as well.
I won't be here next week, actually.
You won't be here next
Apologies.
week?
And this is Stephen.
This is me finding out.
As well. I'm going on holiday.
Wow.
Oh, nice. Where are you going?
I'm going to Poland.
Oh, wow.
Nice. Okay, well, have a nice time in Poland. I'll find someone else, I'm sure.
Mm.
But I do already have a special guest lined up for next week, which will be Maggie Chapman, the co-convener of the Scottish Green Party, who will be joining us for another 45-minute discussion of everything that happens from now until then. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you all again next week.